afternoon, everyone. How are you? So today we are going to talk about medical school personal statements, which is sort of what all of you, if you're applying to medical school this year, should be working on currently. I realize that, everyone's sort of busy this time of year, especially if you're a junior or a senior in college. You have finals and you have the end of the year and you're thinking about your summer plans. And so sometimes it's very, very difficult to really, sort of jump right in and start your personal statement. But as we sort of our mantra, at MedEdits is early is really, really important. So if you're not working on your personal statement yet, you should be. And if you are already working on your personal statement, bravo, because you're right on time. And, that will sort of put you in a position to submit your application to medical school as early as possible. At this point, all of the three major application systems are open. So MCAT, which is, the allopathic medical school application service, is open. You can't yet submit that application, but it's open and ready for you to work on. The AACOMAS is open, which is the osteopathic medical school application service. And that, as soon as that one opens, you can submit it. And then TMDSAS, which is the Texas application service, is also opening. And that one as well, you're ready to submit that as soon as possible. These three application systems require a very slightly different approach for each. The MCAS system is a 5,300 character with spaces character limit. The TMDSAS is a 5,000 character space limit. And so for those two personal statements, there can be a tremendous amount of overlap. Most students, in fact, write one statement for both of those systems, and they just keep it to 5,000 characters with spaces. Now, the AACOMAS application system allows a personal statement that's a bit shorter, 4,300 characters with spaces. And those 1,000 characters actually can make quite a dent in terms of, the overall amount of space that you have to write. The other thing that we encourage students to do is for AACOMAS to really emphasize why you are specifically interested in osteopathic medicine. And so therefore, we don't advocate recycling the personal statement that you might use for MCAS and TMDSAS for AACOMAS. There might be pieces of it that you might use for AACOMAS, but overall, we recommend that students sort of start fresh. Even though most AACOMAS medical schools will send you a secondary essay specifically asking why are you interested in osteopathic medicine. We like for those ideas to also come through in the personal statement, not to dominate the statement, but certainly to be communicated in the personal statement. So the biggest question we get is, my gosh, how do I start? What do I write about? What do they want to know about me? How do I stand out? And, how can I write something that they've never read before, right? And what I tell my students is, it's really highly unusual that a student can write something that a seasoned admissions officer has never read in his or her lifetime. And that's perfectly okay, because the goal of the personal statement is to convey, number one, who you are as a human being. What are you about? What are your values and your characteristics? Where did you come from? What's important to you as a person, right? The medical school admissions officers want to know not only about your commitment to medicine, to community service, to research, to teaching, but they also kind of want to understand, who are you, right? Some people say, well, I don't have a really unusual story. I didn't, sort of move mountains. I didn't have any tremendous hardships growing up to write about, and that's completely okay. Medical school classes, as everybody knows, it's all about attracting a diverse class, right? So no medical school wants, 25 of sort of the same type of applicant with the same experiences and the same background. This is about attracting applicants who have very diverse backgrounds, very diverse interests, and very diverse experiences. So your job in writing your personal statement is to try to convey, who are you as a person? Why are you interested in medicine? What have you done to pursue that interest in medicine? And maybe highlight other things that might not be directly applicable to medicine, but are somehow tangentially related. So, if you're really interested in community service, if you've really done some things that are great in community service, totally unrelated to medicine. Medicine is, by all means, a profession that involves service to your community. So it's related. Do you have tremendous teaching experience, public health experience, anything? What is it that sort of sets you apart? All students, even if they're juniors in college, have done something that, that required time, that required effort, and, that required your commitment. And that's really what they want to see. They want to understand that you are a committed, enthusiastic, and motivated person who is going to, number one, be able to handle the rigors of medical school and residency training and a medical career, but someone who's also going to be contributing in a meaningful way within all of those sectors of your education and your career. So, so this isn't about trying to stand out. It's about communicating and conveying in a passionate and sort of insightful way, what you've done, what you've learned from those experiences, and why they are important to you, okay? We can't talk about a personal statement without talking about activities entries as well. There will be overlap between the topics that you will write about in your personal statement and your activities entries. That's perfectly okay. With AMCAS, when you select your 3 most meaningful activities entries, there might be overlap between those topics and the topics that you also write about in your personal statement, simply because most, young, people in their young 20s, mid-20s, late 20s, you don't have 25 significantly most meaningful things. And so it's okay if there's topic overlap between those most meaningful entries and what you also write about in your personal statement. People often ask me, well, what should my theme be? And in our experience, very, very rarely can a student sort of come up with a theme that, sort of doesn't seem forced and that allows the student to sort of, communicate effectively all of those different elements of what a personal statement should have. So I would say that, maybe once every couple years I have a student who really has a theme that really hangs together. But most people at this stage of their education, the last statement that they wrote was for college. And I can tell you, having read college admissions essays, just sort of on the side, because I'm curious about it, the emphasis of those statements and the topic selection for those statements is so completely different than what a medical school personal statement is. When you're applying to medical school, you're applying to professional school. This is a profession. So it's really a new phase of your education. So kind of forget what you learned in terms of what should be included in your college personal statement. This is a totally different ballgame. And this should be, in our feeling and based on sort of the success that we've had with our students, we feel that a broad personal statement, the goal of the personal statement, it's to convince your reviewer that they want to actually meet you. I emphasize to, it's important to write about what happens inside and outside the classroom, because many students sort of forget about what happened in the classroom. And that's really important, right? Because the majority of your time and energy was spent on your academics and your intellectual pursuits in college. So don't forget to sort of mention those things as well somewhere within your application, kind of what happened during all of that class time. And what interested you as an undergraduate. And it doesn't have to be related to medicine, right? Admissions officers want interesting, diverse people who are personable and who know about the world around them. So don't think that if you're, if some of your greatest intellectual pursuits in college, if it wasn't chemistry or biology, that you're at a loss. You're not. In fact, that can be very, very distinguishing in the application process. So think open-mindedly and think broadly in terms of the topics that you want to include in your personal statement. Again, kind of getting across this picture of who are you in 5,300 characters with spaces or less, and that's not an easy feat, okay? So the key is to write concisely, and this is something we're always encouraging our students to do. Don't go on and on and on about any one subject, so get your ideas across clearly and concisely and efficiently. And certainly that is possible, even though if you haven't started, or even if you're starting and you're just looking at this, this page of ideas that you may have, it seems like the impossible, but it's not the impossible. It's definitely attainable. So, what I encourage applicants to do is really to sort of, brainstorm, write down what were my most important achievements, what were my most important life cycle, kind of events in my life, starting with childhood, and then sort of cherry pick those experiences that were really the most crucial to you as a person, and the most sort of captivating, perhaps, to an admissions officer. And you can take a chronological approach by writing about those experiences, or you don't have to do that. And that, again, to some degree depends on your comfort level. It also depends on what those experiences were and how well they hang together. And it also depends on your talent as a writer, kind of in which direction you take your personal statement. So with that, I think we should kind of open this up for questions, because it always seems that our audiences have lots of questions, and and we like to try to answer those as much as we can.
Okay, so the first question is, how important is it to submit your personal statement in June?
So the question is, how important is it to submit your personal statement in June? And when we talk about submit your personal statement, we're talking about submitting the entire application itself, the personal statement just being one part of the entire application. It's important. You don't have to submit at the opening bell, but we ideally like our students to submit sometime in the month of June. And why is that? You simply will you're more likely to get interviews if you submit early, because you are competing with fewer people. When you start submitting in August, September, a lot of those interviews have already been extended, number one, and number two, the numbers are greater at that point. So the applicant pool is smaller earlier on in the season. And realize admissions officers are not robots, okay? So they need people power to review applications, right? So at the beginning of the season, all of those admissions committee members are reviewing applications. Once interview season starts, they're interviewing applicants, and they're also reviewing applications, and they have all their other responsibilities, clinical responsibilities and research responsibilities, committee responsibilities, whatever that is. So you just have to think it's a function of where is the time and energy going, right? So at the beginning of the season, all the admissions people are just reviewing applications, and then you're sort of competing for their time, the later on in the season that you go. So you don't have to submit on, at the opening bell, but we like people to submit in the month of June, and we feel that any time within that month is we consider that early, based on our experience.
Okay. The next question is, would you recommend focusing on one important experience, such as only research or only clinical experience, or should they use multiple examples?
So the question is, do we encourage students to write about one primary experience in their personal statement, or to write about multiple examples? And again, for us, this is about breadth and depth, okay? So don't write about things that weren't really important just to fill the space, to think like, oh my goodness, I need to also mention community service, so let me mention this community service activity that I did for one afternoon, right? So you want to write about the things that were important to you, but ideally you should be writing about multiple experiences, because you want to sort of really give a full picture of who you are as a person, right? Doctors are not just researchers. They are not just clinicians. You want to sort of give this, this idea that you're a well-rounded candidate who has perspective based on multiple experiences.
Can I write about something that's not medically related?
Can I write about something that's not medically related? Absolutely, you can. For some students, athletics, if you were a varsity athlete in college, or you were an art history major and you did art history research. For some students, the activities that were the most important to them in college, in addition to obviously being pre-med, had nothing to do with medicine, and that's perfectly okay. You don't have to kind of have been on this, sort of have this laser focus where there was nothing else but medicine in your undergraduate years or even after your undergraduate years. So kind of bringing that diversity to a medical school is actually favorable. So certainly you can write about things that aren't directly related to medicine.
Okay. If I'm a reapplicant, can I use my old personal statement?
If I'm a reapplicant, can I use my own personal statement? If you're a reapplicant, you need to analyze why am I a reapplicant? Why didn't I get in last year? And generally speaking, we would probably look at most reapplicants' essays and say, no, start over. Because they're probably, if you're a reapplicant, maybe there was something that was missing, or maybe there was something that wasn't communicated well in that personal statement. Realize the personal statement, along with the rest of your written application, kind of becomes the ticket or the plea, in a sense, please offer me an interview. So that personal statement has to be convincing to admissions officers. So if it wasn't convincing the first time around, it might not be convincing the second time around. And plus, you have a whole year of experiences, hopefully, that, and from which you've grown and matured over the past year. And so you want to include those things in your new personal statement. So there might be pieces of the statement that you can sort of recycle or, kind of refresh in some way. But, you shouldn't just take the old statement and just, use the entire statement in its entirety.
Okay. Very good. If I'm applying to osteopathic medical school, how should my personal statement differ from DO versus MD?
So the question is, how should my personal statement for osteopathic medical school applications differ from my allopathic medical school applications? First of all, there's a 1,000 character with spaces difference between those two application systems. So the osteopathic medical school application system is 4,300 characters with spaces, and the allopathic is 5,300 characters with spaces. So that's a fairly significant difference. So you probably, in our experience, usually the osteopathic statement is a bit more streamlined than the allopathic statement, right? Because you don't have as much time to sort of tell stories and to kind of go into details. And the osteopathic statement, it's our feeling that there should be some mention of why osteopathic medicine. What is it about the approach to patients in osteopathic medicine, and why does that appeal to you? So we do feel that should also be addressed in the osteopathic statement. So we encourage students to write two distinct statements for those two application systems.
This next question has to do with MD-PhD applicants. What's a good thing to keep in mind in choosing a topic for each of these essays? And he goes on to say, I'm a bit concerned about overlap for the primary essay, since interest in medicine is strongly tied to a particular research experience.
So the question is for MD-PhD applicants in particular, how should how do you approach those essays? And for the MD-PhD applicants, there are three essays. There's the personal statement, there is the why MD-PhD essay, and then there is, a research essay. The research essay speaks for itself. You need to write about your research, and that should be a sophisticated essay that we recommend ideally that you have a principal investigator or someone else in the lab, a grad student, review that essay for you, because it should be sophisticated, something that a researcher who might be interviewing you would understand. So it shouldn't sort of be an essay that is sort of written for a layperson, in a sense. The why MD-PhD and the personal statement essays, there might be some overlap there, absolutely, because why you want to be an MD-PhD also relates to why you want to go to medical school. So and also for most applicants, you'll be applying to some MD-PhD programs, but you'll also be applying to some straight MD programs. There are some students who decide to pursue a PhD once they're already in medical school. So it's perfectly fine if those two essays, if there is overlap. There are many students who go to allopathic medical school who still want to make research a significant part of their careers. A PhD is not absolutely necessary to do that. So I encourage students to sort of take those two essays and look at them individually and not together, because they will be considered separately, and they will be considered sort of by different members of the committee. So a researcher might in particular look at the why MD-PhD and the research essay, whereas an admissions officer for an MD school is going to look only at the personal statement. So you don't want to shortchange yourself and sort of not emphasize why research is important to you in your personal statement and only include that information in the why MD-PhD essay. So it's okay, just like the personal statement and the most meaningful, it's okay if there's some overlap there. That's perfectly fine. But the personal statement should sort of be a more general statement, but kind of mentioning a commitment to research within that essay is, you should do that if you're applying to MD-PhD, because those are part of your future goals and part of why probably you've done what you've done as an undergraduate, a postgraduate student.
Okay, you said that the personal statement is about letting the admissions committee know who you are. How do I write about my experiences in such a way that highlights my qualities and who I am as a person? So
the question is that you want, that I mentioned that you want to let admissions committees know who you are, and how do you highlight your strengths and highlight your qualities and characteristics. And that's about writing about your experiences in depth. What did you observe? What did you learn? Sort of really write about it from the heart, in a sense, in terms of your observations, your insights, how those things maybe motivated you, how they impacted your next experiences that you took on, or how did that impact your future goals, or maybe what you want to do in medical school. So it's really hard to kind of say specifically how to do that, because with each student we work on that very individually, right? Because everyone's an individual in terms of what motivates them, in terms of how they observe things, how they express themselves, right? And so this is where the individuality really comes in, and there aren't really kind of formulaic ways to instruct you on how to do that. That's a very individual thing.
Okay. If I'm taking the MCAT in June, should I wait to submit my application until after I get my score?
So the question is, if I'm taking the MCAT in June, should I wait to submit my application after I get my score? If you're taking your MCAT in June, you're probably not getting your score until July. And it really would depend on what your score is. If your score is a 509, applying in July might not be the smartest thing. If your score is a 520, then you're probably completely fine. Of course, also considering, what are your academics like, who are your letters of reference writers, what are your experiences. So all of this needs to be considered together. Are you definitely applying no matter what that MCAT score is? When students tell us, I don't care what I get on my MCAT, I know I'm a good test taker, I've been doing well on my practice tests, I'm applying no matter what the score is, then the answer becomes, well, then submit in June. But if whether or not you apply is dependent on that score, then no, then you should probably wait. Of course, you can always submit an application, and then if the MCAT is really disappointing, you can withdraw, because at that point you probably wouldn't have even completed most of your secondary essays, many of your secondary essays, and you certainly wouldn't have had any interviews, so that's always an option as well.
Can you talk a little bit more about the overlap between the personal statement and the activities entries?
So someone asked about, can I talk about the overlap between the personal statement and the activities entries? So for AMCAS in particular, you have an opportunity to write about up to 15 activities. Most students don't have 15 activities, so it's totally fine if you don't have that many. And of those up to 15 activities, you should select 3 that are considered your most meaningful, okay? And for those, in addition to the 700 character with spaces description, you write a most meaningful explanation, which is up to 1,325 characters with spaces, okay? You will have overlap between the topics. So the most meaningful experiences that you have had in your lifetime, there will be some overlap with what those experiences are and the topics that you're going to write about in your personal statement. We encourage applicants to write the personal statement first, figure out how those experiences are fitting into the overall framework of the statement, and what they will be writing about with regards to those experiences and within the personal statement. Then write the application entries and the most meaningfuls, and take a different approach. Write about a different aspect of the experience. And so that way, even though you're writing about the same experiences, what you're expressing about those experiences is a bit different. So the person, when they read your personal statement, they're learning something about you, and then when they read your application entries, they're learning a little bit something different about you, even though it's the same experience. So, and with our students, there's always overlap. Sometimes The students maybe will write about 2 of the 3 most meaningfuls in their statement, sometimes depending on how many experiences they've had, how old they are, how much life experience they've had. They're writing about all 3 in both of those 2 documents. So all 3 most meaningfuls are also topics that are included in the personal statement. And so it really depends on what your life experiences are, how old you are. Are you a junior in college, or are you 3 years out of college? So that's all something that, is sort of part of the discussion in terms of what you highlight where.
Okay. I have nothing to write about. Do you have tips to get started?
I have nothing to write about. How do I get started? Do your personal inventory. And write about the milestones in your life. And this is something that I write about in my book, The Med-Ed's Guide to Medical School Admission. So literally just start from the beginning. Where were you born? What were the really crucial things in your lifetime? Did your family have hardship? Did you switch schools, and why? Where did you go to college? Why did you make that decision? What were your most valuable experiences in high school? How did those experiences influence your college decision, influence your future goals? What were your major experiences in college? Again, how did those influence your choices and your future goals? And sort of just keep going through this process until you kind of have distilled out and identified the most significant aspects of your background, and then highlight those things in the personal statement, and then just start writing. Sometimes it looms so large over people because they think, I have nothing to write about and I want to stand out. And what I tell people is, if it's that difficult, then you're trying too hard, right? Because this is about writing your story, and nobody can tell your story better than you can tell your story. And so, and everyone has a story to tell. So just start writing.
So if I get my score in July and I don't like my score, can I retake the MCAT and continue with the application process?
So the question becomes, if you're taking the MCAT, retaking the MCAT later than July, either because you're disappointed with the score that you got, or you're taking a September MCAT, should you continue with the process? Should you apply in June? And our general advice on that level is no. It probably is better to wait to apply for the next cycle. Number one, if you do poorly in the MCAT, unless there was a real sort of event that happened that impacted your score in a negative way, it's unlikely that without sort of really doing some real analysis that you will bump your score that significantly. So it's better to sort of kind of really evaluate, what did I do wrong? What do I have to do differently? And to really sort of restudy and refocus and make sure that second MCAT is where it needs to be. When students who rush the retake generally don't bump scores. So we discourage students from taking a September MCAT or quickly retaking an MCAT after an initial test. So basically, if you're taking an MCAT later than June, again, unless you're a phenomenal applicant who is, going to score incredibly well on their MCAT regardless, generally speaking, it's better to wait till the next application cycle to guarantee your success.
Okay. Is it okay to start working on my secondary essays in June before I hear from schools?
Is it okay to start working on my secondary essays in June before I hear from schools? The schools will start sending you secondary essays, secondary applications in late June. Every year, secondary essay prompts change for some schools, not all, not most, but some. And all of the prompts are available online, and Med-Edits will soon be starting a database of those secondary essay prompts, which will be publicly available to everybody. So, if you have the time, absolutely start your secondary essays, look at last year's prompts, realizing that there might be some surprises. With the exception of California schools and a few outliers outside of California, most medical schools will send you secondary applications and secondary essays automatically. So there won't be a question of, will I get secondary essay requests? You will. You're going to get a lot of them, depending on how many schools you apply to. So yes, if you have the time and you have the energy, it's, the secondary essays can really be daunting for some students and overwhelming. So yeah, start them early. Absolutely.
Okay. So for schools that are numbers focused, do they really read my personal statement?
For schools that are numbers focused, do they really read my personal statement? Schools will not tell what their thresholds are to review an application. Okay, but in our experience, the vast majority, if not all, of medical schools have thresholds, meaning that they won't review an application with numbers below a certain point. Okay, numbers meaning GPA, overall GPA, BCPM, biochem, physics, math GPA, MCAT scores. Some schools have formulas, that they use, to give a certain degree of weight to the MCAT, a certain degree of weight to the BCPM GPA, the overall GPA, and then they weight it and then they decide who they're actually going to review. So certainly there are some medical schools that will not review your application if you don't meet their minimum thresholds, meaning that they won't even read your personal statement. And this is why we say to applicants who maybe don't have great numbers, they say, but I have these amazing experiences, I'm a really good person, I want to be a doctor for the right reasons. And we say, we get that and we appreciate that, but the schools won't even read your application if you're sort of below their absolute minimums. And that's just the reality of the process. And it's tough to really find out. That information is not really publicly available.
What's the latest I can apply in this cycle?
What's the latest I can apply in the cycle? I need to look. All the schools have different deadlines that are generally in the fall, so that's the latest, but we discourage applicants from looking at those deadlines seriously, which is why we don't have them memorized. So we certainly work with applicants who are successful, who get into U.S. allopathic medical schools, which are the most competitive group. Obviously, we work with applicants successfully who apply in July, even early August, but they also are very, very quick to complete their secondaries. They do well in interviews, they have good numbers, they have good experiences. So it really depends on who you are as an applicant, in terms of when you should be applying to. Can you risk an August application? Most students can't. So it really depends.
And this is the same question again. Do I have to? The person's friends told them they have to submit early. You have to submit early.
Again, the question, everyone's being told I have to submit early. Ideally, yes, you need to submit early, but not everybody has to. This is a very, very individual thing. Some students will call us in mid-July and say, oh my gosh, I was so busy, I was doing my research in Africa, I didn't submit my application, and they have publications and they have over-the-top grades, and and it's like, okay, you're okay, you can you can submit now and you'll be all right. So again, this is a very personalized sort of recommendation. But the general rule of thumb that we tell all of our students is, yes, apply in June. And plus it alleviates stress, which is huge. Our students who apply in early June, who've done everything, they already have their MCAT, they already have everything done, and then they do their secondary essays quickly. They're getting interview invitations in August, and they're going on interviews in October, and they have their first acceptances, or they're going on interviews, in like September. They have their first acceptances by October. So just in terms of it behooves you to apply early, because it makes a world of difference when you're walking into interviews later on in the application cycle and you already have an acceptance. It just totally changes the way you present yourself. So it makes life much less stressful when you apply early.
Okay, I've been told that I can't write about things that happened before college. Is that true?
I've been told I can't write about things that have happened before college. Is that true? And we get this question a lot. It depends on what it is, right? You want to focus mostly on your more recent experiences. However, for many students, some things that happened before college were really significant in terms of influencing their path. So, depending on your upbringing, you might want to say something about that. If there was something really, really crucial that happened in high school that sort of impacted your choices of where to go to college, whether, to pursue a degree in medicine or not, there can be mention of that. Absolutely. It gives dimension to your candidacy, and it gives the reviewer sort of some idea of who you are, where you're from, what was your home life like, what was your community like growing up, and all of that is great information. So while you don't want to write an entire statement on something that happens before college, of course it's okay to mention, really critical things that happens before college, and most of our students do, even though that doesn't dominate the essay. again, this is about cherry picking the things that, sort of will distinguish you and that sort of paint the clearest picture of who you are.
What is the minimum GPA threshold, more or less?
More or less, the minimum GPA threshold to get into medical school, we like to think of it as a 3.5. However, we've had students who get in with a 3.4, even a 3.3. And again, this is about, the combination of MCAT and GPA. This is about, trends. Many students start their college careers, don't do well. They're distracted. They don't have the study skills because maybe they didn't go to an amazing high school, and so the freshman GPAs are terrible. They go to a school which is notoriously stingy in terms of giving out high grades. So it depends on your trend, and it depends on your MCAT, and it depends on your overall story and who you are. So, but the general ballpark number that people say is 3.5. But there are obviously variations to that.
So I come from a difficult background, and I'm struggling to identify how candid my personal statement should be. While the trauma and adversity I've faced has made me the person I am, and is a testament to my ability to thrive in medical school. The question was cut off here.
I get it. So the question is, if you come from a difficult background, if you've had difficulties in your life, and traumas in your life, how much of that do you write about? And really, it depends on what those traumas are. Depends on how comfortable you are writing about them and talking about them. We certainly work with students who have had all different kinds of disabilities, or not disabilities, but disabilities as well, but difficulties, whether that be financial, whether that be some sort of traumatic event that happened, where they had to go through a very difficult time. And generally speaking, we encourage applicants to write about those things because, again, they were crucial in your development. There are some deal breakers, if there was any sort of major mental illness, not depression, but any kind of major mental illness, we sort of discourage people from writing about that. So there are some things that we discourage, but, overcoming hardships, persevering through difficulties, all of that is really important and speaks well of the student, and, oftentimes. So we have had some applicants assuming that they are comfortable discussing it, right? Because anything you write about is, open for discussion in an interview, but assuming they're comfortable writing about something and discussing something, we encourage that. And in fact, we had one applicant who wrote about something incredibly traumatic that had happened, and it was brought up on an interview, and this applicant started crying during the interview. And it was at an extremely competitive medical school, and that person got in. So, we're all human. So, having been through a difficult experience, and again, getting through it and understanding, maybe that makes you more compassionate and understanding of others. So sort of think about what the byproducts are of that experience. And that's kind of what we try to sort of identify.
Okay, next question. Does being an RN help or weaken your chances of getting into medical school?
Does being an RN help or hurt your chances of getting into medical school? It depends. I realize that's a common answer. It certainly can help. I mean, we've worked with PAs, we've worked with RNs. Understanding medicine from really the inside, I mean, that's a tremendous benefit. It doesn't help in terms of the fact that, you have more experience, or you're going to be a better doctor, because obviously, you understand more about medicine than many of your peers, but it helps because you understand the field, and that has motivated you then to become a physician. So it certainly can help, without question.
All right, does reapplying lessen your chances?
Does reapplying lessen your chances? I wouldn't say it lessens your chances per se. Reapplicants, certainly there's a lower percentage of reapplicants who are accepted to medical school, but that simply is because many reapplicants just aren't qualified, and they just try to reapply without sort of figuring out, well, why didn't I get in the first time, and what do I need to do to improve, and sort of, working on that. But many students their first time around are not successful. And there's many reasons why they're not successful, and the key is to identify why wasn't I successful and to improve upon whatever that reason was, and then submit, a better reapplication. we work with many reapplicants every year who get in successfully. It's an issue of analyzing the previous application cycle and improving upon whatever the deficiencies were.
Okay. Is it true you should never write about your own experience in healthcare?
Is it true you should never write about your own experience in healthcare? And no, that's not true. And for many, many students, and I'm assuming this is someone who's had some type of illness, experience as a patient, being a patient is one of the best ways to learn about what it means to, to be a doctor. What do patients need? What is it like to be on the other side of the table? And, you don't want to be ever negative about the profession or about your doctor who maybe you didn't like or you didn't think was the best treatment, but understanding what it means to be a patient and what a patient needs can be very, very powerful in a statement. So, again, we don't, at MedEdits, we don't like to sort of take these you never do this or you never do that kind of approaches for the vast majority of things, because every student is different and every student's path is different. So it really depends on the student.
Okay, so just explain to everybody, there's a lot of questions, so we're going to get to them one at a time. This student asks, I'm a rising senior who just started my pre-med sequence in my junior year. I'm contemplating organic chemistry 1 and 2 over the summer in time to apply for June 2018 and take the MCAT in May 2018. How does organic chemistry over the summer look?
So the question is, someone who's a junior who started pre-med studies late wants to take organic chemistry over the summer, 1 and 2 take the MCAT during the senior year, apply in June, and that's a fine plan. As long as everything else is there, your research, your volunteer activities, your teaching, as long as everything else is there, taking organic, assuming you're at a challenging 4-year undergraduate college, is not in and of itself a bad thing. Many students take a prerequisite over the summer. That's totally fine.
Is writing about your GPA not great on your personal?
Is writing about your GPA not great on your personal statement? It depends. It depends on how not great is your GPA. Did your GPA improve? Was there some sort of experience that happened in your sophomore year of college that was so life-changing, or traumatic for you that it really negatively enhanced, or negatively impacted your GPA? So that really is an individual sort of question. Depends on the overall picture, depends on how low the GPA is, where the GPA went from there. That's a tough one to answer definitively.
Okay. So despite my previous interest, something that happened to me about a month ago really invigorated my desire to go to medical school. Is writing about this one experience, given the proximity in my timeline, something that could work against me, especially when I'm going up against people with potentially lifelong desires to be a doctor? So
no interest in medicine before
So this student had an interest in medicine.
Yeah.
So something
right.
that happened recently.
Okay, so the question is someone who had an interest in medicine, but something very pivotal happened within the past month or so that sort of really confirmed that interest and, sort of reinvigorated, so to speak, using the language of the student. Absolutely write about it, because this is about what are your motivations. It doesn't mean you had no interest in medicine, right? You're telling me that you had an interest in medicine as an undergraduate, and this experience, however, really sort of solidified that and confirmed that. And so that certainly should be mentioned. Without question, that wouldn't hurt you at all. But that's assuming that the interest was already there, and that there's evidence for that interest that was already there as well.
Okay, am I selling myself short if I don't take the MCAT until September?
Am I selling myself short if I don't take the MCAT until September? Absolutely yes. We do not advise applying.
Even though deadlines are in November.
We do not advise applying in the current application cycle if you're taking the MCAT in the fall. It's just too late.
Okay. Yeah, so we're running a little short on time. More or less, how long will it take to write a well-written personal statement if I'm still studying for a May MCAT and don't have much time to do both?
Okay, so the question is, how long will it take to write a great personal statement if I'm studying for a May MCAT and I don't have a lot of time? The MCAT is priority. So you focus on the MCAT, especially if it's your first MCAT. In the ideal world, we like students to take the MCAT once and do well. And as soon as that MCAT is over, you start working on your statement. Good writing takes time. We prefer that people start working with us and, are working on their statements in January, February, March, but we understand students are insanely busy, and honestly, the vast majority don't start their personal statements, their application entry write-ups until May and June, and that's just the reality. So it's an issue of sort of being focused, really writing it, not questioning yourself too much, not sending it to 25 different people and trying to incorporate all of their suggestions and second guessing yourself. So if you're going to write your statement somewhat quickly, you have to be decisive, and you have to sort of be very prudent in terms of from whom are you going to get opinions, because everybody's going to have one. So, but it certainly can be done. You can write a statement, I'd say 2 weeks is the minimum, a good statement, because, you want to think about it and you want to try to do edits and kind of not rush. Rushed work sort of is always, in our opinion, typically substandard.
Okay. A few more questions. So, with what MCAT score should I consider retaking it?
With what MCAT score should I consider retaking the MCAT? I'd say anything below, it again depends on your background, right? If you're an underrepresented minority, if you've had tremendous financial hardship, it puts you in a different cohort of applicants. So it depends on those two things as well. Assuming that you are not in neither of those categories, I would say that, and again, also depends on the GPA. If you have a 3.2 GPA and a 509 on the MCAT, you're going to have a tough time. If you have a 3.8 GPA from a competitive four-year university and you have a 509 on the MCAT, you're going to be okay, probably. So I'd say ballpark is, anything below a 509 is probably something with which you should consider retaking for allopathic U.S. medical schools, not for osteopathic. But again, it depends on the full picture. It depends on the GPA, depends on the experiences, depends on do you only have your undergraduate grades, how many years of undergraduate grades, what was your trend, all of those kinds of things. We look at these things in terms of the big picture to make those decisions.
When is the latest I can take the MCAT and apply this cycle?
When is the latest I can take the MCAT and apply this cycle? And again, I sound like a broken record, but it largely depends on your background, your grades, your experiences in terms of making that decision. If you're an excellent applicant and someone who's probably getting in, I'd say July. If you're sort of more of a borderline applicant and maybe doesn't have sort of that threshold GPA and maybe the experiences that we like to see, I'd say May. But then for some, we'd say June is okay. So it really depends on the applicant and kind of the overall profile.
I'm actually a freshman going into my sophomore year this fall. Do you have any tips for me to get ahead of the application and personal statement process?
So the question is, a freshman who's a rising sophomore, what can they do to get ahead of the personal statement and application process? And it's terrific you're thinking about this. So you're going to do really well. I'd say keep a diary, keep a journal, write about your experiences as you go along. And it's a great question. And, sort of write about your observations. What are your insights? And that way, not only can you sort of go back to that to try to, sort of pull out the things that were really significant to you, but you can also kind of watch your own maturation and growth. And that sort of is typically what leads to a really amazing personal statement when you can sort of, in a sense, document that evolution. So it's great to start thinking about this now. So yeah, everything that you do, whatever you're doing this summer, whatever you're doing this during the school year, both in terms of your academics as well as in terms of your extracurricular pursuits, write about them. And that way, when you start writing about your experiences for your personal statement and your application entries, you've already thought about it, right? So you already sort of know what's important to you, and you kind of have an idea of what you're probably going to be highlighting where. It's a great question.
Last question. I have a lot of research experience but no clinical experience. Is that okay?
Question is, I have a lot of research experience but no clinical experience. Is that okay? First of all, let's define what clinical experience is. In someone who doesn't have a medical degree, typically that involves shadowing. It involves volunteering in a free clinic. It can involve EMT work. For people who are taking a gap a year or two, it can involve scribing, becoming a medical assistant. Assuming the research is lab research and it's not clinical research where you're interviewing patients and you're involved in the hospital, which can sort of, those types of experiences, the clinical research experiences can sort of bridge both of those things, so that, you know, that involves clinical experience and research. But assuming it's bench research, you have to get some clinical exposure. You're going to be asked on your interviews, how do you know you want to be a doctor? And if you've never been in a clinical setting and you've never observed, whether as a volunteer, as a shadow, it's not going to be convincing to people. So we have students who come to us with phenomenal research backgrounds, but they have zero clinical exposure and they don't do so well in the process. Some of them get in depending on, you know, kind of what else there is in terms of their metrics, their grades and their GPA, but it's very tough to convince someone you want to be a doctor if you've had no clinical exposure.
Okay, so we're gonna call it quits there, and I apologize because there are a few more questions, but we're out of time.
Okay, so we are out of time, but I thank you all for your attention and for tuning in, and I wish everybody luck. You know, the key is to stay organized and to stay calm and to sort of work on all of these things methodically, because this is sort of crunch time for a lot of students, and it will all get done. So just sort of make a list, make a schedule, and it will all get finished. Okay, and the application year is a really exciting year. Sometimes very stressful, but very, very exciting. So good luck to everybody.